Every man has a few fundamental needs: eating, drinking, finding love and friendship, and of course, taking the piss out of Game of Thrones seasons 5 to 8. And while themes are for 8th grade book reports, let's see all the themes of A Song of Ice and Fire and early Game of Thrones, and how they were all butchered by seasons 5 to 8. So it is not a stretch to say that A Song of Ice and Fire is heavily inspired by real history, and while most people stop at realizing that Stark equals York and Lannister equals Lancaster, and make an approximate comparison between the War of the Five Kings and the War of the Roses, in reality the similarities go far deeper. A lot of characters have strong inspiration from history, chief among them Ned, who is a clear parallel to Richard III, as well as basically all the wars and battles in A Song of Ice and Fire that are almost completely pulled from history. As Game of Thrones is a faithful adaptation, for the first 4 seasons this remains there, with the premier example being the Blackwater, that is a clear parallel to the 8th century siege of Constantinople. But as the show started drifting away from the books, these parallels slowly disappeared. In fact, the only historical parallel in later seasons is the Battle of the Bastards, that is a fun mix between the battles of Cannae and Zama. But unfortunately, this is where any relation to actual history stops, with the show in later seasons completely losing any sense of the real history. And nowhere is that more painfully obvious than the ending. See, instead of taking inspiration from IRL history and having the story end with a system of absolutist or preferably constitutional monarchy, both of which are vastly better than feudalism, the show ended it all with aristocratic elective monarchy. But see, there's a problem with this. There was a state in real history that had this kind of system, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the result was a state that was weaker with each passing king, resulting in a country more and more unable to deal with foreign threats, eventually resulting in this. So if you need more reason to hate the ending, keep in mind that the inevitable conclusion to what Tyrion and company decided is this. Another theme that is related to history is the question of what is power, put so well by Varys here.
But if it's swordsmen who rule, why do we pretend kings hold all the power? Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall.
What Varys is talking about here is the very important question of where does power and legitimacy stem from? Armies, gods, money, or just the people?
Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses, not from some farcical aquatic ceremony.
See, back in the Middle Ages, and for a good deal later, monarchs claimed their power derived from God, and that they were ordained by divine right, because while Varys is right, and power only resides where men believe it resides, aka all power and legitimacy stems from the people, it took a long time for the people to realize that. In England, it took till the Civil War, when the discussion of whether the power of the king stemmed from God or from the people via parliament was one of the big ones, finally resolved at the end when the king was executed for treason against his people, thus stating once and for all that the king was not only answerable to God, but to his people as well, and that his power and legitimacy derives from them. In A Song of Ice and Fire, it does seem as that realization is coming in the form of Aegon, the supposed son of Rhaegar Targaryen that invades in a dance with dragons. See, in the books, Aegon will more than likely be king without much noble support, but with the support of the people. Even more than that, Aegon is probably not who he claims he is, and yet he will be one of the best kings ever. And that contradiction, combined with the fact that Dany will undoubtedly dragon him to death, and then become a bit of a tyrant, will give the obvious conclusion that birthright is nonsense, and that legitimacy cannot derive from God, blood, or conquest, with the end result probably being a constitutional monarchy, like England after the Civil War. In the show, however, there is no such thing. After season 2, the question of where does power reside is never brought up again, and in the end, while legitimacy by blood is abolished, we don't really get a better replacement, with the show saying that legitimacy now stems from a couple of High Lords and nothing more, whose own legitimacy is never questioned. How wonderful. But now let's change from the macro to the more micro and look at one of the main themes of A Song of Ice and Fire is the pointless cycle of vengeance, destroying all. There are countless examples here, be it Robert's Rebellion, everything connecting to the Red Wedding, the Grand Northern Conspiracy, the Dance of Dragons, and many more. But no subplot emphasizes this better than the Dornish one, in a very beautiful and very poignant line said by Elaria Sand. Oberyn wanted vengeance for Elia. Now the three of you want vengeance for him. I have 4 daughters, I remind you. Your sisters. My Elia is 14, almost a woman. Obella is 12, and on the brink of maidenhood. They worship you, as Doria and Loreza worship them. If you should die, must Ella and Obella seek vengeance for you? Then Doria and Lori for them? Is that how it goes? Round and round forever. I ask again, where does it end? But in the show, that same character does this.
And weak men will never rule Dorne again.
And that's not all. Arya is an even better example of the show butchering this theme. In the books, Arya is going down a very dark road that will probably end very badly for her. In the show, however, after graduating from the House of Bland and Shite, she mutters all the Freys as revenge for the Red Wedding, with no consequences whatsoever, be them internal or external. Arya is not punished for what she did, and she herself goes through no change as a result, in the end sailing happily towards the sunset, with no consequences or repercussion. Cause in the Dragon Show, vengeance is only bad if Dany does it. If it's Arya mindlessly killing countless innocents, it's all good. Speaking of the show dumbing down difficult dilemmas, in the world of Ice and Fire, nobody is 100% good or 100% bad, and that is one of the great things about it. It's filled to the brim with fascinating internal dilemmas. Early Game of Thrones had an abundance of that in characters like Tywin, Jaime, Varys, Littlefinger, Theon, and countless others. It was a world where the truly bad or the saintly soon died, and where those who do not bend, break. But as the show moved on, all that great morally grey and all that great inner conflict slowly disappeared. Cersei turned into a Disney villain. Jaime renounced everything good about himself, while Jon became so dumb he was incapable of having a personality or a will.
You are my queen. I don't know what else I can say.
Yeah, we noticed that, Jon. And Dany, oh boy. See, in the books, Dany has a strong inner conflict due to her 2 conflicting sides, Mother of Dragons and Misa. And those 2 heavily clashed in A Dance with Dragons, and by the Winds of Winter, we can see her leaning more and more towards her Mother of Dragons side. So it's probable that when she arrives in Westeros, she will go full fire and blood on her enemies. In the show, however, instead of this morally grey stuff, we have a Dany that is the Messiah until season 8 episode 4, before turning into Satan himself. Tyrion was done dirtier still. Book Tyrion goes into a long period of depression, PTSD, self-loathing, and nihilism after he kills his father. Show Tyrion is just the happy voice of reason wanting to save King's Landing.
We kind of forgot about...
I saved this city and all your worthless lives. I should have let Stannis kill you all.
Speaking of Stannis, he is still, however, the character done dirtiest. He was a man driven by duty, learning to rule and to bend, who, as Donald Noyle put it, started as iron, hard and strong but brittle and inflexible, breaking before bending, but who through the forge of war was being turned into true steel, being capable of bending and winning. Instead of that, we got this.
In the name of Renly of House Baratheon, first of his name, rightful king of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm, I, Brienne of Tarth, sentence you to die.
There are no words in the English vocabulary for how much Weiss and Benioff sodomized his character. Speaking of character, let's now look at one of the most important themes in A Song of Ice and Fire. This one is kinda tied to the previous one in terms of importance of character depth, but it's even more important. Identity is probably the second most important theme in A Song of Ice and Fire. Almost all characters struggle with their identities. Sansa struggles between being a Stark and wanting to be a proper Southron lady. Dany struggles between her identities as Misa and Mother of Dragons. Jon struggles with his bastard identity. And Tyrion struggles with his imp identity and his true self, at one time choosing but failing to actually become the monster people think he is, while Jaime struggles with his Kingslayer identity, and everyone hating him for his most noble act ever. As for Arya, she has too many identities to count. That's pretty much the point of her story. In the show, however, by the end, there is no such inner conflict. Sansa is Ladyfinger, Arya is God knows what, Jon is a lobotomized dog, and Tyrion is Appo, the whimsical dwarf. All the conflict, all the substance, and all that inner conflict is gone by the end, and what we are left with is planks filled with only the most simple ideas. The only exception is Theon. His arc and his identity is actually done well, and he has a satisfying death scene. There is some dumb along the way, but in general, he is well done. But as I said, identity is only the second most important theme in A Song of Ice and Fire. The most important one is... In A Song of Ice and Fire, this is shown in a number of ways, be it the horrors of war, or the fact that said horrors occur only due to the nobles playing the Game of Thrones with no regard for the lives of their subjects. In the books, this theme comes across best in Septon Meribald's Broken Man speech. I'll leave a link here for anyone to read it. This is without a doubt the biggest message of A Song of Ice and Fire. We see this theme prominently in seasons 2 to 4, in the Riverlands, as we see the impact of the war, and we are led to understand that no matter how just a cause is, war is always evil. But as season 5 comes around, this changes. Jon's fight against Ramsay is the only moment in which we see some of the horrors of war. Dany burning ships full of slaves is treated as a glorious moment of empowerment or some such. The Riverlands are done even worse. In seasons 2 to 4, we see some of the damage done to them, but from season 5 we don't see anything. Or it is in A Feast for Crows, which is roughly equivalent with season 5, that we see most of the damage done by the war to the Riverlands in A Song of Ice and Fire, from both Jaime's and Brienne's POV. It is in there that we also have the Broken Man speech in the books. The show's stance on war gets even weirder with Dany's invasion of Westeros. The show tries portraying the battle near the Blackwater like some tragic, devastating thing, all the while having this epic, heroic theme and some random NPCs burn. That's not conveying that much of an anti-war theme. The only real anti-war moment is the sack of King's Landing, but that is pretty weak for several reasons. For one, it's simply stupid. The Lannisters have already surrendered and rang the bells. There is no reason for anyone to do this unless they are monsters. And they are not. And speaking of which, the anti-war theme becomes ridiculously overblown, with Dany firebombing civilians and Unsullied losing discipline, somehow, and randomly executing conscripted prisoners. And what's worse is how sudden and without any setup this is. Take this line from Septon Meribald's speech. If they want new boots or a warmer cloak, or maybe a rusted iron half-helm, they need to take them from a corpse. And before long they are stealing from the living too, from the small folk whose lands they're fighting in, men very like the men they used to be. They slaughter their sheep and steal their chicken, and from there it's just a short step to carrying off their daughters too. This is a depiction of the way war slowly degrades the fighters, and how they slowly, but surely, lose everything about themselves, eventually caring only for their immediate survival, or to quote Septon Meribald, all thought of home is gone by then, and kings and lords and gods mean less to him than a hunch of spoiled meat that will let him live another day, or a skin of bad wine that might drown his fear for a few hours. In the sack of King's Landing, on the other hand, Dumb and Dumber just suddenly flip a switch and the whole army goes ape and murders everything in sight. So in the end, for Tweedledum and Tweedledave, war is only hell when Dany is sacking King's Landing and an entire army suddenly turns into the Huns. I could give more teams Game of Thrones kinda forgot about, but honestly I think these are enough. Anyways, thank you for watching and I'll see you all next time. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.